This video is sponsored by Autogeny. I've been thinking about the concept of dead MMOs for the past couple months. These spaces were designed to hold hundreds or thousands of players at once, and are reduced to a husk of what they once were. Desolate chat boxes eagerly waiting human speech to give them purpose. Monsters roaming freely knowing nobody is coming to kill them. Exploring these environments alone is like tapping into a lost realm. It's eerie, sad, and often peaceful. It made me think about how the areas are designed to accommodate multiple players, and how the life within them that's now left behind still continues its same cycles regardless of a lack of spectators. It's online but empty. It's alive but dead. And in search of more abandoned worlds like this, I came across a game called Autogeny. But what I found here didn't make me feel quite as alone as I thought it would. There's something deeply unsettling about unexpected presences in a lot of scenarios, especially when you're online, which brings me onto today's sponsor, Autogeny. By using this browser, you can avoid relentless ads by turning on the ad blocker feature, and even hide from prying eyes with the built-in VPN which helps protect your privacy. Autogeny makes my browsing experience seamless, and I really appreciate the video pop-out function, but more importantly for me, it's heavily customizable, allowing me to avoid taking damage from the blinding light of white web pages and comfort my eyes with the Force Dark Mode option. I can even incorporate the visuals of my favourite games into my daily screen time, and you're spoilt for choice with all of the GX mods available. You can enable and disable things like custom fonts, sidebar and taskbar icons, indulge in animated, static, or live wallpapers that react to your actions and have both light and dark versions to choose from. There's even the option for custom splash screens, background music, and keyboard and tab interaction sounds too. And if that wasn't enough, you can also turn on shaders that add cool effects which can be mixed and matched with all the other customization options I've already mentioned to really make your browsing unique to you. It's super easy to switch to Autogeny thanks to the Quick Import tool, which allows you to move over your inventory of bookmarks, cookies, and browsing history from your current browser. And it's even compatible with every Google Chrome extension too. You can use my link below to download Autogeny today and try out the best browser around. A big thank you to Autogeny for sponsoring this video. Seconds after booting the game, I was met with the teal shade of 90s Windows desktops plastered with the words Plaza 96, home of user-hostile design. I did some research beforehand and read that this MMORPG was developed and published in 1996 by Xenos Softworks, an Albanian art collective who were active from 1993 to 97 and whose members remain anonymous even today. Despite the mysterious Plaza 96 going offline around the time that the Albanian Civil War began, there are whispers that there is still one server online. I locked my eyes onto the screen as I logged into this last vestige of this game, and I was eventually presented with a hazy pink lobby that held both my entrance and exit from this reality. Venturing further, I stumbled across the humble signage dictating the controls I would be using for this adventure, and began by familiarizing myself with the available character skills. It was a fairly standard list consisting of estrogen, body forging, caffeine, poetry, and murder, so with that I continued into the main lobby. I briefly explored the food court, toilets, and emporium, where I discovered my first weapon and tarot card, which, according to the game's manual, can affect your faith, physical, and piercing damage, as well as your speed, strength, and defense stats. I immediately upped some of my skill levels by consuming floating pills and chugging the contents of an entire stovetop coffee maker, with my fruitful streak continuing as I found some labour vouchers and a left arm lying around nearby. It was time to see what variety of environments this server had to offer, so I pushed onward into a rainy area with a couple buildings dotted alongside a main road, and travelled by car to some kind of tunnel system that led me to a rather peaceful level adorned with ruins and falling snow. I couldn't believe my eyes when I found another being, and spoke to them for a moment before entering a nearby structure, of course collecting any more loose limbs I spotted along the way. There was a spotlight straight ahead of me that highlighted a torso attached to the wall, and upon closer inspection, I could attach the body parts I had scavenged, with the missing head conveniently located in the next room. Even so, I was missing a leg, and determined to complete the puzzle, I trekked through the adjacent hallways, discovering a hostile boss that killed me in no time. Thankfully, I respawned, and this time I took a different route, which brought me to a desert environment where I could farm enemies for tarot cards and other useful equipment, even beating a giant beetle and locating that last leg. Ecstatic that I had found the final piece, I rushed back to the body assembly station and awaited my reward, but all I got was a message instructing me to observe the heavens. Something instantly felt different, and I could see that the tunnels that were previously accessible were now blocked off, forcing me towards the outside world to witness what I had summoned. The earth violently shook as an anxiety-inducing noise blared through my headphones, growing louder and louder as a giant glowing cross engulfed the silhouette of a floating statue disappearing into the sky. In a panic, I desperately clambered for the safety of a structure, but my manic tapping of buttons was in vain. I had no choice but to run to the entity's origin, helplessly realizing all I could do was gaze upwards in despair before... This is a fraction of my experience with Plaza 96, the fictional MMORPG that serves as the setting for pagan Autogeny, which is actually a real game made by a real developer named Oleander Garden that was released in August 2019. It was the first fake dead MMO I experienced, and served as the inspiration to make this video, prompting me to hunt down other games that share its setting to understand what these spaces can mean, and what goes into their design process. The phenomenon of true MMOs naturally dying over time is one thing, but fictional MMOs that were built to echo that experience are entirely another. They aim to emulate something that has truly experienced death, exploring specific themes and employing mechanics one would recognise from the genre to build their own emptiness that isn't reliant on an existing multiplayer history. A real MMO isn't created with its own demise in mind, but for the devs of the games I'm discussing today, their MMOs were made to die. Thankfully, I was able to get a lot of insight from a few creators as they kindly took the time to answer some questions I had. And in the case of Autogeny's use of a dead MMO to explore its themes, Oleander Garden said,
I think the multiplayer, and especially persistent multiplayer character of an MMO, makes that kind of game world feel a lot more like a space and less like a strictly authored object. That helped make things feel lived in, decayed, lost, etc. in a way that really worked with the whole self-making out of techno-mythic rubble thing the game was going for. Likewise, I suspect the 1995 to 2004-ish era of MMO design in particular, which was much less authored, much more sandboxy, much more scattershot and weird, is A, especially good at producing that impression, and B, developed out of a very specific mythical ideological project which has now been abandoned. The prevailing Y2K notion that one might live a second life in a digital world, which seems almost quaint or pastoral today. I figured this would produce a certain feeling of dislocation, of living in the ruins.
MMOs have existed for a few decades by this point, and the landscape for them is drastically different now to what they were in the early 2000s. Autogeny doesn't aim to depict a modern title, making it clear within the first few seconds that this world was built back in the 90s. The dev's goal was to explore themes like contemporary technological mythology and degraded game forms through the lens of hauntology and the sense of longing for lost futures.
In the home stretch of development, I tried to give Autogeny lots of little details that would scream early MMO in particular. Open world dungeons with bosses to farm, impossible zone transitions, this sort of thing. I don't know if it would have worked if it felt like Final Fantasy XIV, you know? It had to be an old MMO.
Obviously, it's not trying to be a carbon copy of a game from the era it's influenced by. Instead, taking on some recognisable mechanics and moments, and then framing that within a dreamlike, eerie ghost town that creates the feeling of visiting a dead digital space you once inhabited during its glory days. Plaza 96 isn't something anybody would have played. After all, it's a fictional MMO that from an Autogeny player's perspective never existed until now, and therefore they wouldn't have any kind of relationship with its world. We're actually witnessing the protagonist Vivian's journey through a game they once spent many hours playing with friends, even encountering characters that recognise their long-lost ally. To recreate that atmosphere of revisiting a digital relic of one's past, the game opts for a balance of cues for its graphical age along with a surreal grainy mist that serves a feeling of melancholy. Though that too can be argued to represent technical constraints in the same way Silent Hill's fog is an answer for draw distance limitations, although that in itself can bring about an oppressive and profound atmosphere organically. It's accurate enough for an MMO of its time, considering the first 3D MMO came out in 1996. So it's not like Autogeny is showing what is supposed to be an MS-DOS game featuring HDR and ray tracing. Thematically, this title takes a dying space and uses it as an opportunity for creation, quite literally forging a new body, a new identity, that could only come that easily in a virtual world offering the freedom to explore oneself, without reality's pressures and restrictions. It's a sentiment that all goes back to the idea of those second lives that digital worlds provide anyone and everyone. It's also a space to be perceived by others in the way you wish, even functioning as an opportunity to confront yourself and reevaluate your identity in the real world. It takes no effort to notice Autogeny is highlighting the trans experience in conjunction with all of this, symbolized in a game that blends feelings like loneliness and fear with freedom and peace, leading to extraordinary moments that exhibit feminine transcendence from the virtual world that the sum of its parts inhabit. Plaza 96 doesn't just exist in its EXE. Its manual is a separate PDF downloaded with Autogeny, and the lore behind the fictional title can be found on Oleander Garden's website alongside her other work. The history of Plaza 96 and its developers is presented as though they're archives of web pages from a dead game wiki, which is an undeniably natural format of storytelling for its subject. Autogeny is part of the Pagan trilogy that also consists of Technopolis and Emporium, and are all experiences you can find on itch.io that follow Vivian's voyage through various lost digital realms. You can also play Autogeny on Steam like I did, and just so you know, I've barely touched upon its many corners, secrets, and more involved endings, so I highly recommend playing the game for yourselves and leaving a review if you have a spare moment. There are several modern titles that use the Dead MMO setting, with a more recent one being NetEscape, which currently has a demo version available. The game's director, lead artist, and writer Crispy Boat, who you may already know for their amazing 3D art, was inspired by Redline's video series on YouTube that covers dead MMOs and also the investigations of cults said to be operating within them. The concept of history in digital worlds that's born from player interactions and a malevolent force occupying said space was a key factor of NetEscape, which takes the form of a colourful 90s MMO that has been largely abandoned and is on the edge of non-existence as its servers are about to go permanently offline. We're put into the shoes of a journalist who played the game back in its prime, and now needs to capture screenshots for their retrospective article before all access is lost. With about 30 minutes until its closure at midnight, we visit a few different areas such as Terminal Life City and Dave's World to find and grab pictures of various subjects that are scribbled onto sticky notes at the bottom of the monitor. In our quest, we encounter things that perhaps aren't meant to be seen, and meet the disturbing players that remain. NetEscape takes on a chat room-focused approach to its UI, with its emotes and text chat embedded into the red frame surrounding the gameplay view. Although these elements are currently just aesthetic choices in this demo version, given the time constraints for the game jam it was made for, Crispy Boat mentioned that they'd like to try adding more functionality for those components for the full game. Compared to Autogeny, NetEscape goes for a greater focus on the social mechanics to showcase its narrative. And thanks to not having the pressure to completely function like an actual MMO, certain creative liberties can be taken.
Of course, the actual way in which the story was presented, taking photos to get files, was not realistic to an MMO at all, but I think there's a lot of potential towards the connectivity between actions in the game and the desktop itself. We sort of quickly realized that there were a lot of pitfalls in presenting the game in a totally accurate, realistic way without confusing the player. We actually had to patch in a notification sound for the file system just because a lot of people would never bother actually checking the photos they took during the game.
NetEscape allows the player to interact with both the fictional game and the desktop it sits upon, even adding a third layer to the experience by giving a view of the physical desk the player character is working from. For me, this was a constant reminder of the boundaries between each layer, and how easy it is to switch between them. almost as though our easy access through them implies something from the virtual world could cross into ours just as effortlessly. Speaking of traversal, the game uses a rather stilted form of movement using arrow keys implanted into the UI. It's purposefully slow and anxiety-inducing, preventing the player from quickly escaping any threat and adding a touch of discomfort in having to spend more time in an eerie world you'd like to leave as soon as you can. In terms of the areas you visit, there are both what seem like official rooms, but also personal, customizable spaces. Dave's world in particular is plastered in cat photos, portraying a genuinely realistic human touch to a virtual space like this, while also serving as an image of a subject of the real world existing in a digital one, blurring the lines between them.
The empty MMO, to me, represents a sort of time capsule for people you've never met. A public space where people put so much of themselves into it, you get to learn so much just through the fragments they've left behind. It's this sort of melancholy nostalgia that I hope we can really channel in the game's full release. Like many people, I grew up in these spaces, and to see them shuttered in favor of a handful of social media platforms really fills me with a sort of nostalgic sadness, as genuinely I felt that these spaces were really important for kids and young adults. The term dead internet comes up a lot nowadays, and I feel in part it can be attributed to the sort of forced migration towards a handful of social media platforms devoid of the liberties and expression niche online spaces provided for people.
Hearing this made me think of custom worlds as digital graveyards, with players eventually abandoning their virtual properties that remain scarred with personal markings. It's a gallery of someone's personality on display for as long as the servers exist, even if that surpasses the life of the person who curated its pieces in the first place. Crispybo also said that NetEscape's full version could even explore other MMO features like minigames, and use them as parts of puzzles players will have to solve, connecting even more recognizable mechanics of the genre to elevate the experience. You can find NetEscape on itch.io and Steam, so be sure to add it to your wishlist to keep updated when the full game comes out. This next title doesn't have the same MMORPG or chat room trappings like some of the other games I've discussed here, but I can't fully explore the possibilities of fake multiplayer worlds without bringing up No Players Online. For those who aren't aware, there are actually two versions of the game. The first being the short classic experience, and the other being a full game that's currently in development which expands upon its predecessor. The original title fully revolves around joining a vacant Capture the Flag server, and discover its developer is using the game to bring back his dead wife, begging you to leave them be. While developer Adam Pipe was in an exchange program in the Netherlands back in 2019, one of the assignments that his game design school tasked him with was to build a map for Unreal Tournament. Since Halloween was coming up, the idea of creating a horror experience naturally sprung to mind, and it was while he was wandering the map for his assignment without any bots that the atmosphere took on a different turn, especially with the addition of ambient sounds.
I remember that as a kid, I used to play Gmod a lot with my friend, and because I was always hosting the server and our computers were very slow, it would always take like 10 minutes at least for my friend to join. Adding that ambient sound really reminded me of that, because Gmod maps always have this ambient sound in them that's a bit unsettling. I remember being so scared to wander around on my own because these maps were always known to have jump scares, so I would just wait at spawn for my friend.
Porting the level into Unity was more work than it was worth, so Adam quickly made a small symmetrical map for the game's environment. Thinking about it, the layout probably wouldn't be very balanced for actual Capture the Flag gameplay, especially if you had to squeeze in 16 players, which is the maximum number indicated by the server list. This unconventional approach to level design, not being made for 16 players to actually interact with, but simply to be a stand-in for this sort of environment, made the space feel even more sinister. A facade meant to make you stop questioning this space in hopes to lower your guard. It's also surprisingly disorienting, in part due to the missing minimap, which would normally be present in an FPS like this, giving the impression this is not a place that's trying to entice players. Regardless of the game itself being a single-player experience, there is actually a social element that exists outside of it. Thanks to the ARG surrounding additional secrets and sequences in No Players Online, a community quickly grew in response to the unsolved mysteries, piecing together the clues that would lead to the previously unseen content. It's actually how I found out about the game in the first place, and gave rise to a lot of well-deserved popularity for the title. The upcoming version of the game features a desktop view that lets you interact with other games and applications, making it about old tech more broadly as a vehicle for horror and opening up different avenues to engage with the narrative.
I think old tech, limitations of old tech, just old design standards or quirks or imperfections are all things that make something feel a bit uncanny and scary. Games nowadays are so juicy and smooth and responsive. You're constantly at ease because you're being taken care of. There's no friction. There's something powerful with horror when you have to make a player do something tedious with the anticipation of the scare. Going through that old server list menu really feels like you're undusting something. You also can't jump, you can't look very far ahead. It makes it all feel so evil. Then there's also the subversion of it, adding things for authenticity that have no point. You have a gun there, but there's nothing to shoot. You have a player list, but nobody is online. You have a match timer, but the match never ends. Even delivering the flags doesn't have a point because there's no game because nobody is on the other team. It makes the whole environment feel like you're not welcome, like it's just this graveyard and all you're doing is trampling the flowers.
No Players Online covers themes like grief and obsession, centered around a developer who spends 11 years on a game that is supposed to revive his dead wife. As Adam describes it, it's like letting a project take control of your life and deeming it as so important that it never actually gets finished due to the unreachable self-imposed end goal.
Here is this game that had so much potential and interest, but the developers were so busy trying to make it into this impossible thing that people just lost interest and it never became something real or alive. The dead server is literally a testament to a dead idea, a dead person, an unfulfilled potential, and a constant reminder of not being able to let go.
Virtual experiences like video games are meant to supplement reality and not replace it, at least if you've got a healthy attitude towards them. So the notion of keeping a person that no longer exists in the real world and digitizing them to cage their soul within the boundaries of an otherwise empty virtual space is pretty horrifying. The subject becomes a victim of not only death, but also a victim of someone who refuses to surrender to their loss. These dead MMOs and servers are haunted digital graveyards, but unlike the player, these ghosts aren't allowed to leave. You can follow the full upcoming version of No Players Online on Steam, and even play the available demo to get a taste of the new mechanics and story that have built upon the classic title. In this next game, we get a glimpse into an MMO in the hours leading to its death, which, unlike the other titles we've seen, is actually still fairly populated. Agony of a Dying MMO is a small demo that explores a gritty, even dystopian game world on the brink of its demise, and the player base's reactions to its closure. It illustrates the different kinds of people who inhabit this virtual space, showcasing a community that has a gentle pacifist side as well as a toxic and unsavory one. The contrasting personalities all have their own way of coping with the end of something they've poured hours of their lives into, and as the player, we interact with other humans and NPCs, the latter of which also seem to be responding to their impending doom. While the almost suffocating UI on screen renders the gameplay view a slightly inconvenient letterbox that probably would discourage players if it were a real MMO, there's a lot to this experience that feels scarily accurate.
I wish I never played this game.
The voice comms and fuzzy microphones struck something deep within my multiplayer memory of those spaces, and the synchronized dancing emotes are quite frankly an MMO staple. The fake players come across like actual human players, and I would sometimes even forget that they weren't, sending a pang of surreality through my mind when I eventually remembered. Agony of a Dying MMO reminisces upon the casual and hardcore players, and both the positive influences and the life-destroying effects that certain relationships to a virtual life can invite, as well as the existential crises that occur when faced with the loss of the one thing that you shaped your identity around. It's a depressingly realistic and anticlimactic portrayal to the end of an online game that made me feel like I've been a spectator of this world for years. It took me through all kinds of moments, sometimes nostalgic and sometimes uncomfortable, somehow all packed into a short 20-minute experience that you can find on itch.io. Unfortunately, looking at the little information I could find on its development, it doesn't seem like a full game will ever come out, but I genuinely think that this demo alone is incredibly effective in exploring the death of a digital world. Aside from sharing the core concept of using a multiplayer space in a single-player context, the titles I've spoken about all fall somewhere on the horror spectrum, even if just with their subtle eeriness beneath the surface. All of these experiences use older MMO aesthetics too, like it's the contemporary form of a dilapidated neighborhood mansion that inspires ghost stories and urban legends from locals, perhaps even tempting a dare for some peer-pressured teen to enter its supposedly haunted interior. Obviously, the idea of a dead or dying virtual space that is meant to be filled with players can be a disquieting environment to navigate in general, but I did find an example where horror isn't present at all in a game called Docip.net by a developer called Hade. In this game jam entry, you go through a simple character creator and run around a chat room world for only 15 minutes or so before the servers are terminated, a fact which a countdown timer at the top of the screen doesn't let you forget. At the bottom you can see an active chat box and player list, and within the 90s-inspired map you'll be in the company of dozens of player models. Some areas are busier than others, giving it further authenticity with the other players typing borderline nonsense in the chat that you can also contribute to. It reminded me of when I was in high school playing old-school RudeCanine, watching similar model animations and floating usernames drift across my screen. I'm not even kidding when I say stuff like this feels more human to me than one of those hyper-realistic face tech demos. Anyway, at the end of the countdown, you see the numbers begin to dwindle as players are sent flying upwards into the sky, putting an end to your own connection to this world with a rather blunt, straightforward error. These fictional multiplayer worlds don't actually have to be playable as an MMO. They're solo experiences with simple mechanics, mostly involving walking around and basic interactions. You don't have to find other players to join up with or commit to hundreds or thousands of hours, but you can argue that their effectiveness relies on some experience of real MMOs, or at least knowledge of them. Still, things like ARGs can compensate for a lack of multiplayer in-game and generate a reason for people to work together outside of it. And some of the titles I've spoken about even have strangely believable fake players running around. Mimicking the behaviour of human-controlled characters is also something that appears in Erenshaw, a fully solo experience that imitates a living MMO, even letting you invite these simulated players to join your guild and level up alongside you. In an old video, I described how visiting a hub world or area in a single-player game is almost always static, being how you left it. Whereas MMOs and online games in general are so susceptible to change, whether that's through updates, dips in player counts, or even the servers going down completely and no longer being accessible. It can be like visiting your childhood hometown after years away, noticing how much has changed and how much isn't there anymore. MMOs can harbour lost memories too, and maybe a trip into an old virtual home could remind you of an online friend you made there and wonder where they are today. A real dead or dying MMO can represent lost futures and a harsh reminder of passing time, but a fictional one can explore stories about identity, grief, and conspiracies, exploring what ties we have to virtual worlds and what's left behind when we leave. They can do this without requiring the mechanical complexities their online ancestors have, and instead focus on the emotional ones.
Maybe we could say that living in the ruins of an MMO works as a sort of 21st century Gothic. It's not the space, precisely, it's the social field that created that sort of space, and the way its influence still lingers. Playing too much EverQuest will probably destroy your life, but there's something fantastical and romantic about early EverQuest stories. People waking up at 3 AM to go kill a dragon with 70-odd strangers in their shared digital space. There's nothing romantic about meta or AI girlfriends, only the life-obliterating part survived.
I found it so surprising how many different applications there were for dead MMO settings, and I imagine there's still a lot of untapped territory to uncover. So if you have any recommendations, do let me know. I'd like to thank the developers who agreed to be interviewed for this video, and while I couldn't fit in all of the things they shared here, I'll have a link to the full interviews in the description. A huge thank you to the guest voices as well, and I highly recommend checking out their channels for their fantastic videos. I'll have them down below too. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see my future work, and a big thanks to my patrons for making this all possible. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.